Hey folks, welcome back to the Edupedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta, and we will be continuing with the standards on auditing, right? And the standard under consideration for the lecture would be SA 600, which is using the work of another auditor. And let me remind you, this is not the first lecture on this essay. This is actually the last lecture that we are going to conduct on the SA 600. That means we have already had 2 more lectures. If you have missed any one of those, please go back, refer to them, and then come to this lecture. Otherwise, you would miss the flow, right? So the viewers who are viewing directly, who are onto this video, it is just for your information that we have already recorded 2 videos on the same SA, right? Whereby the major content is already covered. And whatever little bit points that are remaining will be covered, and this video will be shot for that purpose, right? And for them who have been following me with the previous 2 videos, let us commence further with this standard. So I'll just brief you through the topics that we have covered in the previous lectures. We have done the introduction part, right? These were the 5 subheadings over there that we have discussed. Moving on to the definition, there were 3 definitions we have discussed. That is about the principal auditor, other auditor, and the component, right? Remember, when we're talking about the component, it is any division, branch, subsidiary, joint venture, associated enterprise, right? But only those will be included, only those would be considered to be the component if their financial information is included in the financial information being audited by the principal auditor. Right, that means all the components which are actually the component will not be considered to be component for this specific standard. Why? Because their financial informations are not included in the main financial information. Clear with that? Then we moved on to the principal auditor's procedure. What are the procedures the principal auditor will follow to determine whether or not he will move ahead with using the work of another auditor? Right? What are the assessments that he does? What are the procedures that he performs to clarify his doubts, perform to get the assurance, perform to get an understanding on the entire matter, right? So we have discussed the procedure 2 in the previous lecture, that were that he could visit the component. What are the situations when he can visit the component? Obviously when it is allowed by the statute, right? And he will have to visit if there is no other auditor on the component, but if there is one, he may not visit, he may visit, right? We have seen the provisions already. Then consider the professional competence if he is not a chartered accountant. And what are the situations when he's not a chartered accountant? If he is not in the country, that means the component is situated somewhere in the foreign country, abroad, outside India, right? And as per the rules, as per the statute governing that country, right, there was some person XYZ who was appointed as an auditor to that component, right? And over there it is not necessary that he would be a chartered accountant. So in that situation we would see his professional competence, right? Then we have obtained the sufficient and appropriate audit evidences, discuss the audit procedure with the other auditor, and at the end review a written summary. The written summary is actually the questionnaire that you had sent. He has reverted on that questionnaire, or he has reverted with the work that he has performed, with the task that he has undertaken, right? And at last you consider the findings relevant for your inclusion in the financial information that you are providing. Clear with that? So that was what we have covered in the previous lecture, and there were very minimum topics that were remaining, and we are taking that up in this lecture, right? That is coordination between auditors, right? When we're talking about auditors over here, we're talking about both of them. Yes, the principal auditor as well as the other auditor, the 2 auditors whose definitions have already been covered in this standard. So what do you think? For what are they coordinating? They are coordinating for the information, for actually performing procedures on the information of that component. Who would do it? Will it be done by the other auditor, or will the principal officer have to visit the premise of the component? Who would govern it? Who would decide? Who would plan? Who would direct? All these things, right? There has to be a coordination, because as we have seen earlier that the principal auditor coordinates, right? He communicates the plan of where and what work will be used, right? The other auditor will send him his work, right? What is the specific work which is relevant for the principal auditor? Where is he going to incorporate the work that he receives from the other auditor? Right? What are the things that he wants from him? What are the assertions that he wanted to be checked? All these things have been communicated, and now they will go ahead to perform a good coordination in their work. So for this, the specific things that we will discuss is that the principal auditor may issue written communication to the other auditor. Right? So why would he do that? He would do that to maintain the sufficient license between the principal auditor and the other auditor. And for that, if he is finding it necessary, he would issue the written communication. That is it. Nothing more in that. Right? Then we have the other auditor should coordinate with the principal auditor. Yes, now when the other auditor has received, right, the communication from the principal auditor, he has to perform his task accordingly and then communicate and coordinate with the principal auditor. Now you understand that the principal auditor has already communicated what he wants out of the other auditor, right? So the other auditor is well informed of his task and his procedures that has to be performed. What is the conclusion that he has to draw? What is the exact content that he has to provide to the principal auditor, right? So what he will do is, while he's performing his task, he will have to communicate and coordinate with the principal auditor. Right? Now the coordination will also be required if there is something that the other auditor comes across and he thinks that no, this should be dealt at the entity level. Right? Like for example, if it is a transaction between the entity and the component, right? And he thinks that okay, this would be better dealt if we would look at it from the entity's point of view, right, from the entire overall entity level, then he would have to coordinate with the principal auditor and say that look, this is a transaction that has taken place between both of us, right, and you will be the better person to go into the details of this because the authorization, initiation, everything was done from the main entity. So if something like that comes, then he has to coordinate, he has to properly communicate within time. Why? Because there is a deadline associated with the audit of the component. Right? You remember when the principal auditor communicates with him, the task, he has also specified the duration, the time by which he would require the work from the other auditor. Right? Obviously, if you are considering his work, right, you will want that work to be provided before you begin any procedure on that particular part. Right? If he gives you after your procedure time is done and now it's the reporting time and then you get the data and then you think, oh, based on this data, you think that you have to undertake further procedures, additional procedures. You need to revise your nature, time and extent, but then it's too late. Right? That is why he has mentioned it initially that look, this is the date by which I have to send the report. That means this is the date by which I have to freeze the financials, which means this is the date by which I can take up the last procedures. Right? So if you want to give me something, if you are giving me a shock at the end, please make sure you give me that shock before the deadline. Right? So he has to coordinate. If there's something in his hand, he has to communicate immediately. Right? And even the principal auditor should advise the other auditor if there is any matter that comes into the attention of the principal auditor. Right? And he wants the other auditor to work upon that and give him some details on it. Okay with that? Next you have the principal auditor may require the other auditor to answer a questionnaire. So basically what happens over here is the principal auditor will prepare a checklist, a questionnaire that okay, these will be the specific questions included. Like there will be some general question, what are the works you have performed, what are the areas that you have tested and the areas for which you are providing the information, right? Then second general question is what are the kind of procedures you have performed for that, right? Then you may go ahead with asking, okay, was there any exception that you noticed? What was it? If there was no exception, how do you conclude that everything was correct? How do you judge the existence, the accuracy, the completeness, these assertions, right? The questionnaire can contain a lot of things actually, because the principal auditor, if you remember, had already communicated with the other auditor the task that he wants him to perform, right? Now he will see whether or not the other auditor has applied the professional due care and competency. What was his objectivity in performing that specific task? Right? These things have to be confirmed to the principal auditor before the principal auditor incorporates the work of the other auditor. Right? So that means the other auditor had to discharge some specific duties. Right? And did he or didn't he? How did he? To what extent did he? With what objectivity did he? Right? All these things will form part of the questionnaire that the principal auditor forwards to the other auditor, and then the other auditor fills up that questionnaire, responds to them, and reverts it back to the principal auditor. Right? That is how we coordinate between the two auditors. Clear with that? Now I hope this concept is clear, because there was nothing much as per if you look at it from a bullet point of view, right? But yeah, you had to have that understanding, right? Now there are two last things remaining with us. One is the reporting consideration and the other is the division of responsibilities, right? After that we will come to an end of SA 600. So what are the reporting consideration? This is the first thing that we'll be seeing. Now this is actually the primary responsibility of an auditor. You have been appointed as an auditor of a company basically for issuing a report. A report on what you conclude with the view of the financial statement about the entity. So, now what do you think? What are the kinds of report that the principal auditor can issue which would be affected by the other auditor's performance, or the task that he has performed, the details that he has sent, the data that he has delivered to the principal auditor on demand, right? Now suppose the principal auditor had communicated him on time that yeah, these are the things I need, and within due time, with the proper procedures performed, with the due competency, capability and objectivity, if the other auditor provides the relevant information to the principal auditor, and then when the principal auditor goes forward to evaluate it, right, he thinks that yes, these are appropriate, these have been performed very well, and this can be used by the principal auditor directly for his reporting on the financial information, right? And he concludes that okay, everything is fine. He has also sent you the questionnaire and received everything, done all the parity checks, checked your competency, your capabilities and everything, and also determined its impact on the nature, time and extent on other procedures. But he found it to be clean and good report. So what does he do? He would also issue an unmodified report, right? If he doesn't have anything to modify in the entity, right, where he's auditing, right, over there if there's something to modify, he would modify. But if that is clean and you get a clean report from the other auditor as well, then you would give ahead a clean report. That means an unmodified report will be issued. Now there is a situation, right, that the principal auditor may conclude that the work of the other auditor cannot. Why? Because he did not perform the exact procedures I have asked him. The procedure that the other auditor has performed that will not meet the criteria, that will not actually resolve the discrepancies. That is an improper procedure adopted, and hence the principal auditor is not able to draw any conclusion out of it. So he would render that task, that job of the other auditor to be useless for him, right? So he cannot incorporate it into the financial information, right? Or he thinks that okay, even if I include it, I can include only a certain part, but rest are all bogus. That means irrelevant things have been done by the other auditor. Now if when he receives the data, when he receives the revert of the other auditor, and he considers that the work of other auditor was merely, I would not use that word, it was not a proper thing, then what happens is that he will have to decide whether he'll visit the component. But now suppose he doesn't have time. Why? Because the other auditor actually provided things to him at the last moment, and now he has a lot of work at the main entity level that he needs to wind up. So he has no time to visit the component. So what does he do? He'll mention in his report that yes, the component is being audited by another auditor. We had requested him for certain data, right? He has reverted back with the response, with the data that was relevant for us, but we do not consider it to be dependable, right? We do not consider it to be relevant. We do not consider it to be correct. Why? Because there were procedures we performed and we did not get a good conclusion out of it. That work that the other auditor has given us is rendered incompetent over here. It is incompatible for me to include it into the financial information. That is irrelevant for me. Since that work was given to me at the end moment, I had no time to go back to the component and perform procedures to check these things. Hence, it would be a modified opinion. Now there is one more situation. Now suppose the other auditor himself issues a modified report for the component. He says, no, everything at the component level is going wrong, is going haywire, is going I don't know where. Right? There's fraud that has been conducted, there is element of error over there, principles have not been properly applied, the accounting is not properly done, there are transactions missing, whatever be the case, right? There's fraudulent debtor, fraudulent creditors, fraudulent bank loans, whatever. If there are any situation that would lead the other auditor to modify the report of the component, then the principal auditor will accordingly input or insert a modification in his report. He will have to mention in detail as to what report has he received from the component, from the relevant component, right? And if he thinks that the report is unsatisfactory, he would also mention that, okay, since they also qualify their report and we after further analysis also determine that yes, that needs to be qualified, so hence this qualification is included over here. So you have the basis of qualification paragraph, you write the basis on which you have given the qualification, and then you write what qualification or what modification have you actually given. Right? That would be the reporting consideration. And at last you have division of responsibilities. Now remember, when we're talking about the principal auditor and the other auditor, right, the responsibility will be divided. Yes, the principal auditor cannot be considered responsible for the work that was entrusted on the other auditor by him, right? But yeah, if there is a situation that he should be suspicious about the reliability of the work of the other auditor, then in that situation his suspicion should have been given a form, right? And if even after being suspicious he has incorporated it conveniently in his financial information, or when he was actually deciding upon the kinds of report that he needs to issue, he did not consider those matters, then he would be considered guilty. But yeah, if he takes it in good faith and gives out his report, unmodified report, and further if something goes wrong, that would be the responsibility of the other auditor. Because the auditor of the component the principal auditor has already entrusted his liabilities, his powers, his area, specification, everything to the other auditor, right? And hence for this division of the responsibility, now think, how would he divide the responsibility? How would he know who is responsible? The principal auditor will have to include in his report that yes, although it is my responsibility on the overall opinion, on the entity wise, on the entity level, the overall level, right? But still there were certain components, right, who had employed the other auditor, who had appointed the other auditor, and we have already communicated with the other auditor, and he had his responsibilities for the certain task that they have to undertake, right? And we are relying and depending upon their report, and hence that percentage of detail and the information of the component has been included in the financial statement, right? If this is the entity and it had 10 components, then the financial information of the 10 components have been included in the overall financial information. So if anything goes wrong, right, then you know as to what percentage of the deviation would actually be a result of something going wrong at the component level, right? That is how he divides his responsibility. And once he has drawn that line, the line of division of the responsibility, he is no more responsible for the work that has been sent for a toss, that has been spoiled by the other auditor. I mean the auditor of any of the component, right? That is it. That is all about the standard. So SA 600 comes to an end over here. I'll just give you or take you through in brief, because we have covered this lecture in this essay in 3 different lectures, right? So I would just give you a recap of the entire thing and the content that you need to remember to write in your examination, right? Because we have discussed a lot of things. Not all of them is relevant for your examination. Some were actually narrated and demonstrated to you for your personal growth. That means you should know how to go about when you are in the practical scenario for auditing, right? So from the exam points of view, what you have to remember is number one, okay, the reference to the SA 200 is not very important. Another auditor of the component is the person, right? Non-applicability on the joint auditor and predecessor auditor. This is not a question that will be asked in the examination, but you have to be careful that if the question talks about joint auditor, you do not refer to this standard, you refer to standard 299, right? That is just a reminder over there, right? What will you do if the component's financial information is immaterial, right? Then you determine the effect. How do you determine the effect, right? Then you have the definition, principal auditor, auditor of the means the auditor with responsibility for reporting on the financial information of an entity, right, on the whole, right? And in that, when the financial information will also include the financial information of the component, only then we say that the principal auditor has come into play. Otherwise, he is normal an auditor. There is no need to use the word principal auditor and other auditor unless and until there are more than one auditor. That means one auditor for the entity and the other auditor for the component, right? If there is just one, there is no concept of principal and other auditor, right? And the other auditor is obviously the second person in the above definition. And the last part is the component. You know that all those components that you actually look at from the bare eye, only those components would be considered as component for this particular essay, right? Whose financial information are included in the financial information of the entity. Then the principal auditor's procedure. Even this is a very important topic. You can be asked to write a full-fledged answer on the procedures followed by the principal auditor. So it is visit the component depending upon the statute, depending upon the situation, consider the professional competence if he is not a chartered accountant specifically, obtain the sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, discuss the audit procedures among themselves, and at last review a written summary, right? The other auditor may have given you a written summary. Please go through it and review it and then consider his findings to incorporate into your work, right? Then we have coordination between the auditors, where we talked about the principal auditor may issue a written communication to the other auditor and the other auditor should coordinate with the principal auditor. That means he has made a communication over the mail that this is a requirement, and then he coordinates with the principal auditor. The other auditor will coordinate with the principal auditor as to confirm what are the exact things that he has to do, right? And if there is something which is relevant for the entity, he will have to coordinate and inform them. Next is the principal auditor may require the other auditor to answer a questionnaire, right? Then we have the reporting consideration. If the other auditor issues a qualified report, you issue a qualified report. If the other auditor issues a clean report, does not necessarily mean you issue a clean report, right? You will see and you will look at it. If you think that the work, although given by them, is correct but it is not reliable, you will give that qualification that no, the work was not reliable on my end. And the last is the division of responsibility. You will have to draw a line. You will have to inform that yes, this is the total of the entity and this portion is actually depending upon the components. So my responsibility lies only till this point, and after this the component will take up the responsibilities. That is the end of SA 600. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, right? And that was useful for you as well. For any queries, any suggestions, anything you want to discuss, please use the comment box below. So please stay tuned for the next lecture, which is SA 610. So until then, this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. Thank you and bye-bye.